So when Mary asked me to do this, I said, she downloaded all the slides for me to my computer. And I said, could you download like 1/10 of your knowledge and expertise as well? And she said, everything I know is on the slides. So we'll see. I noticed we're a really small crowd this morning.
Oh, 5? Ooh.
2 or more, and he's still here.
Yep.
Okay, so you might remember last week, Saul told everybody that they couldn't eat until the war was won, but Jonathan didn't hear that. And there was this little thing about eating. And so we're in this battle at Mishmash. See, she didn't even download proper pronunciation. But it does mean that it is a hideout or a concealed place, and you can see it kind of as a center. And I think last week she was talking about the Philippines. The Philistines, sent out 3 raiding parties out from Mishmash. What was interesting was that there were no metal smiths in all of Israel. So when they needed metal or metal sharpened, guess where they had to go?
Yeah.
They had to go to the Philistines. And who are they at battle with?
The Philistines.
So they don't have any way to get metal or sharpen metal. So they possessed a few swords and a few bronze-tipped spears, and that was it. At this battle, only Saul and Jonathan owned swords, and they each had a spear. Everybody else was fighting in boiled leather vests and with flint-tipped arrows and spears. Not a good scene. Now the Philistines were camped at Mishmash, which is a high mesa above this canyon. And there's a narrow road to pass the mesa and beyond. So Saul went off, or Jonathan went off to see what was going on with the Philistine strength, and found a rocky crag where there weren't very many guards to protect the Philistines, as there was no other way in. The ultimate statement of faith: you know, there is nothing to stop the Lord from saving Israel with just a few men. And he had a loyal armor bearer. Any projection from anybody? Anybody guessing what may be going on next?
They're very brave.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Uh-huh. Ooh.
And the plot thickens.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And look at Jonathan's response to this.
Confident.
About faith. Is this a logical conclusion? What does this say about Jonathan?
Confident.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
confident.
He's been into the weed.
Pardon?
What'd you say,
I
Elaine?
said, he's been into the weed.
He's been into the weed, smoking funny cigarettes, huh? What does this say about what the editors of the scroll of Samuel wanted us to think about Jonathan? That he was rash? That he was brave? That he was foolhardy?
Had strong faith.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are we ready? Jonathan and his armor bearer climbed on up, and as soon as they had footing on the level ground, they attacked and killed the 20 men guarding the gap.
Oh my God. Whoa.
Were we shocked?
Yes.
A little.
Mhm.
Then there's a panic in the Philistines' camp because they thought an entire army was attacking.
Yep.
But God put their fear in their minds, souls, and hearts that they were going to lose this battle. And then God threw in an earthquake. Just to calm things, just to excite things a little bit more.
Yep.
An earthquake. Philistines. Why am I going against the Palestinians? The Philistines were panicked, and it was a mess. This is the Mishmash Mesa. The tilled fields on the top will help you orient your view. Saul had no idea that Jonathan had taken it upon himself to attack the Philistines, but he could see from the opposite mesa that the army was in an uproar. Saul said, "Call the roll, see who's gone from us." Discovered only Jonathan and the armor bearer were missing. What conclusion do you think he's drawing at this point?
That the Philistines were pushovers.
Or that Jonathan's run away. Jonathan and his armor bearer have run. I mean, he doesn't know. Saul doesn't know, other than he can see chaos on the other side.
Yeah. He didn't know
So Saul said, "Okay, bring the ark up here and put it within the side of the battle." And God continued to inspire the Israelites and to make the Philistines panic even more. Calling roll does take time. Why doesn't Saul take immediate action to support the person who is causing the panic?
It sounds like he doesn't know that Jonathan's up there causing havoc.
Or is he still peeved with Jonathan for counteracting his orders to not eat?
could be.
That could be.
Why does he allow the religious ritual? You know, it also slows him down when he said, not only do we have to take roll, but we got to bring the covenant with us. So what do you think's going on in Saul's mind?
He's won the war.
He's won? How many of you think he's won?
Could it be that he has discounted Jonathan entirely and thinks it's entirely due to the earthquake and God's doing? So
That's a possibility too. Let's see if we get any answers. Saul ordered his army to cross the divide between the mesas and engage in the battle. Now the Hebrews who had deserted to the Philistines' camp suddenly grabbed weapons and they joined the battle on the Israelite side. So now we've got the Philistines in a pincher movement, isn't it? Isn't that what you call it, Mike?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. You know the military terminology, I don't. So the Israelites who are hiding in holes in the hill country came out because the Philistine army is running away. So now those that were scared and hid out in a little hole, they're getting in on the action. So the Lord gave Israel victory that day through the help of Jonathan and his armor bearer. To whom did the victory really belong?
Jonathan and the armor bearer.
Well, one
God.
might say God. I say God working through Jonathan and the armor bearer. Okay, so now we've got part 2 of the rash oath. By dark, the troops who, if you remember correctly, had not been eating, were allowed to eat. And they killed animals and they killed and cooked the beasts so quickly they even consumed the blood, which is forbidden by the laws of the Torah. So this is not necessarily looking good for the Israelites. So he said, no, guys, I don't care how hungry you are. This is where you are going to bring all the animals to be eaten so that it can be properly drained of blood and prepared for roasting. That night, Saul asked God before the altar if God would help Saul in a night attack against the retreating Philistines. And God did not answer. Commentators believe this is excessive religiosity, which was empty of real devotion and perhaps an excuse not to act. That's an interesting point. What do you guys think?
I agree.
Sometimes it helps and sometimes it gets in the way.
Yeah.
Makes me think a little bit about Gary's sermon and tribes. I think there were maybe a couple of tribes going on here.
Could be.
Saul's immediate assumption was that someone had offended God, and that person, even if it was Jonathan, would have to die.
Wow.
Mm.
Hard-nosed, huh?
Rigid.
Yes. We shall find out by casting the Urim and Thummim. This was a device that would give God's answer yes or no questions. The high priest carried these two objects next to his heart under his ephod. Sort of makes me think of when I read this, I did read these slides before today, just to be prepared, and to absorb all of Mary's knowledge.
Yep.
But it did make me think about a Ouija board.
Me too.
Now, Jeff and Mike, you guys may not have done the Ouija board, so seem to be more girl things. But
Oh, we had it. We had the Ouija. I never played it. Yes.
you know, I always kind of felt like the Ouija board was giving me the answer I wanted.
Yeah.
As you moved your fingers.
Yeah, that subconsciously I was making it say what I wanted.
Yeah.
At any rate, Saul and Jonathan stood on one side, the people were on the other side. Saul said, "Who sinned?" The device indicated both Saul and Jonathan. They separated, and again the priest asked God which had sinned, and the device indicated Jonathan was guilty.
He drank the blood.
No, he confessed that he ate honey,
Yeah.
unaware that Saul had made an oath for the whole army that they should not eat until sunset. What do you think, guys?
Well, I guess Jonathan's gotta go. I don't know what happens with the story.
Yeah.
Saul said Jonathan shall die,
His own son.
his own son. Why did he think that was so important?
Because he had said that he would do that. So he had to do that in order
He had to do that.
Keep the
Yeah.
word. Mhm.
But the people shouted out in protest, claiming that Jonathan should live because God had worked through Jonathan to bring victory that day. Therefore, they reasoned God must have forgiven him.
Hmm.
Nothing like the power of the people.
Thank God for the people.
Yeah.
So the people ransomed Jonathan, or at least convinced Saul that God had redeemed him. Kind of a flashback to Abraham. Does anybody get a little bit of that flashback to Abraham,
Yes.
who was going to sacrifice his own son?
Yeah.
Yeah.
After this incident, Saul stopped his army's pursuit of the fleeing Philistines, allowing the very few survivors to go back to their country unharmed. Benevolence coming from Saul.
Yep.
Like Saul asking God for permission to for a night attack, we as a church seem to demand a sign from God before we act. We wait for signs like full funding, full staff, rising membership, or denominational authorization.
Mm.
Now, my mind immediately, when I read that, immediately went to going back to full worship.
Mhm.
And because we've kind of held off doing that until we got, you know, the proper furnace filters and the proper sanitation, and I don't disagree with that at all. It just was interesting. What would happen if, like Jonathan, we said perhaps the Lord will act for us and we leapt ahead in faith? That's a question I guess we all have to answer for ourselves. I, for one, will not be at worship in the parking lot today. Just saying. But maybe I need to act out more in faith.
And I was a little confused because I thought it was a service and communion, but they said it was just going to be communion now.
It's just it's the Eucharist service. It's what has been on YouTube that we were supposed to watch before we drove to church and got the communion.
Oh, okay.
So this is just going to be a communion service. When is the church acted like Saul, and how did that come out?
Mm.
Can you think of times when the church, not necessarily Good Shepherd, but generally the church?
I'm sorry, I don't know enough about Episcopal history since I'm kind of new.
Okay.
So I'll leave it to you experts.
Well, I'm not. But I think the church does, because we're human, I think we do have a tendency sometimes to hold back and try to do what we think is pleasing to God. And then when are times that the church has acted out bravely, like Jonathan?
When they allowed women to become priests.
women to become priests.
It was very, well, it was seriously changing the survival of the Anglican Episcopal Church.
Some of us would probably say that the church had acted like Saul for a very long time
Why not?
in not allowing women into the priesthood. I think the same thing has been true of LGBTQ.
Yes, I was
Yeah.
going to say that.
And it's always worked out just fine when we've acted out in faith, hasn't it?
Well,
We're on the right
yes
side
and
of
no.
history.
You know, once we allowed women to become priests, we lost 25% of our congregation to the African primates.
Yeah, that was when we allowed gays
The gay bishop, yeah. That's when we lost him.
Yeah. And who's to say that that flock isn't, or that tribe isn't the right tribe for those people who left us?
Well, if they are the right tribe, it's a little scary because they've allowed some countries to come out with execution of gays, and I mean the primate, the bishop of that country, to say, I support this by my silence. And you go, whoa.
Well, some of the bishops in Africa were not silent about it. They were actively saying that the U.S. church had acted outside of God.
A little scary.
Mhm.
Acting out in faith is always going to be tricky, isn't it?
Yep.
Mhm.
So that seems to be the end of that show.
Good job, Deb.
Well, we've
Yes,
got
thank
more if
you.
we want it. What time is it? My watch isn't working. Oh, we've got time.
Yeah.
We can go to everybody see God rejects Saul as king?
Yep.
Okay.
We do. Yep.
Interesting. Especially in light of our conversation in the last deck of slides. God rejects Saul as king. Makes me curious. How about you?
Yep.
So Saul fought for Israel's border on all sides. He saw an excellent volunteer fighter. He brought him into the full-time army. So as Samuel predicted, the sons of the elders became commanders in the field, whether they were needed at home or not. The Amalekites had been enemies of Israel ever since Joshua fought them in the desert. Didn't we already see these slides?
No.
No.
Okay. So they allied with the Midianites in Gideon's time. And God had given up on the Amalekites and decided to eliminate them as a threat to Israel once and for all. So God not only ordered Saul to attack them, but God ordered Saul to destroy every one of them and their livestock too. This is a holy war. In Hebrew, and Haram, which is pronounced Hiram.
Hero.
My Hebrew's a little iffy.
That was the rough God. The tough God.
So unlike other wars, this was not caused by a breakdown in diplomacy or human greed. This war was God's vengeance. Also, unlike other wars, soldiers could not expect to profit from the spoils. This is God's vengeance. Saul did as God commanded, except he spared their king and kept the best of the livestock to share with his soldiers who fought well, and they were going to use this livestock for breeding. Saul, who was so do it by the book, do it as God commands, has now changed. The problem was that Saul, at the people's request, did not do exactly as God commanded. They didn't kill every sheep, goat, and cow, and they didn't kill Agag, their king. What do you think's going to happen?
To be punished. God could punish him.
What's the motive to bring back a captive king?
To keep the enemy in submission.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking,
Ego.
excuse me, I talked over you, I'm sorry.
Oh, perhaps it was an ego thing for Saul. I don't know.
An eagle thing.
Ego, yeah.
In Austria, when I was in Vienna for a period of time, our local co-worker who was appointed himself our tour guide took us around Vienna every weekend and made sure to show us where the Habsburgs had buried their royalty, where they had buried all parts of their royalty. There was a fear about enemies recovering the bodies of the dead Habsburgs. So they buried their heart in one gravesite, the heads in another gravesite, and the body in yet another gravesite. And so it was important to our tour guide and co-worker that we see where all parts of the Habsburgs had been buried. So we spent 3 weeks looking at the grave sites because they buried all the Habsburg hearts in one place, all the Habsburg bodies in one place, and all the Habsburg. So it was really quite interesting. But their fear was that they would resurrect the bodies of the Habsburgs, and that would help them to take over the country. And I'm wondering if that's not the same sort of thing here. They're taking the captive king. Now they own his whole body, and granted he's alive, but they own his whole body. So there's no place for the Amalekites, should any survive, to go to reunite. Just an idea. Why might they pressure Saul to let the best of the best animals live? Breeding purposes, obviously.
I also think
Better
you know,
stuff.
Yeah.
to keep the soldiers as soldiering, you have to offer them something, and then once we conquer, you'll have riches in that which you captured,
Yeah.
and we'll give it to you. And they're going, what do you mean we got to kill them?
Yeah.
I need to live, and I want this herd of cattle, or this
Yeah.
And why would Saul yield to that pressure?
He would have an insurrection if he didn't.
There is a fear of that, yes. So God's word came to Samuel saying, I regret making Saul a king. Saul has not carried out my command. Samuel was angry with Saul too. Samuel went to meet Saul at Gilgal, where Saul was anointed. And when Saul spoke with Samuel, he lied. He even said that he had done what God commanded. Samuel said, why do I hear sheep bleating and cattle lowing? Saul said, well, we thought we were in the right. We saved the best for a sacrifice, but we destroyed the rest. Bald-faced lie. Samuel says, stop. Here's what the Lord thinks. The Lord sent you on a mission, and you did not obey his every word. Samuel continued, God does not want you to save these animals or King Agag. To have killed all those animals in the field would have been better. To obey is better than sacrifice. Even if you now offer them all as a guilt offering to God, you didn't obey God's command. Why is God so angry with Saul?
He lied.
Is there anything Saul could do to re-enter God's good graces?
I guess kill all the animals and say, see, okay, I'll do it for you.
But he's already said that's not going to be enough.
Well,
So what can Samuel do to appease God's fury? Because remember, according to Deuteronomist theology, what happens to Israel, the whole of Israel, if Samuel doesn't intervene to put the nation back on the road to obedience?
they'll be defeated.
They'll be
Not just defeated, but will happen to Israel what God wanted to have happen to the Amalekites. Saul said, I have sinned. I was afraid of the people. I gave in to them, and I beg you, forgive my sin. And Samuel said, you have rejected the word of the Lord. And the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. Samuel leaves. Saul begs for more, even tears a part of his robe off. Samuel says, like that piece of cloth, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. I have sinned, yet come with me now that I may worship the Lord. So Samuel took pity on him and helped him to worship the Lord. And Samuel finished God's work for Saul and killed King Agag, the king of the Amalekites. Samuel left Saul and never in his life saw Saul again. However, when Saul knew he would die, Saul invoked Samuel's ghost, and they spoke then, but that's another story.
Mm.
Samuel grieved over Saul, but the Lord grieved, ever making Saul king of Israel. We have issues with genocide, but the book of 1 Samuel does not. We would expect an American soldier to disobey an order for genocide. Is this not true, Mike?
Well, if you look at the Vietnam War, when the My Lai massacre happened,
Yeah.
there was about another 20 that nobody mentioned.
So they didn't disobey. Right.
But Saul's issue is not with the orders or with genocide itself. He virtually accomplishes that. So what is Saul's issue? What tempts him to disobey? At the heart of this story is a lesson about hearing the Lord well and obeying completely and without question.
Even when it involves the killing of people.
And I don't know about you, but I've got trouble with that.
Well, look at the Crusades, look at all the battles. We always can put a death as a reason for survival or victory. In the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia, 3 million people were killed in that war. Cambodians, Vietnamese, Laotians.
And America.
Were killed in that war.
How do you explain God ordering genocide? Did God really do that?
I think that's the authors of the Old Testament.
Yeah, Mary did give us that little hint, didn't she? David also had a battle with the Amalekites. It may have been a related tribe, but obviously not the ones that Saul targeted. So Mary suggests that we think about the story of Esther. The king's advisor in that story tricks the king into signing a decree that authorizes killing all the Jews in that king's country. Did you know that advisor was an Amalekite? Interesting tidbit. Many scholars think Saul is a tragic figure. He barely got started as king and then is rejected. Do you think he's tragic, or do you think, as God seems to, that he's truly the wrong man for the job?
He was the man that was given the job, and he had to make decisions between religious and military strategic decisions. And there's always that conflict that goes on. If you've seen the movie Patton, you'll see that often, where he invokes reading of the Bible for some very large death rates in the battles.
Which movie was this?
Patton.
Patton. Oh, okay.
So God changes God's behavior with King David in that God does not require total and complete obedience. God does require an admission of sin and a sincere request for forgiveness. However, with David, God is faithful to him and to his dynasty, despite David's sins and character flaws. Has God changed, or is there another explanation?
Different authors.
There's a good one. Well, let's find out. Samuel finds another king. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul? I've rejected him." Samuel must have felt love for Saul in that he in the role of prophet could not show. With all that has passed between Saul and Samuel, this grief seems odd. What do you think might be the roots for that grief? Some of you may know that I had a not very good relationship with my adopted mother, and that she was not terribly kind to me. And yet, when she died, I cried. This was a relationship. It wasn't the best relationship, but I cried over the loss of that relationship, the hope I had always had that my mother would be a better mother. And now she's dead. She can't ever be that mother that I wanted. And I'm wondering if the same is true. Samuel has put a lot of time and energy and love into that relationship with Saul.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's only reasonable that he should still grieve. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse, the Bethlehemite. According to Matthew's gospel, Jesse's grandmother was Ruth, a Moabite. Further back was Tamar, nearly stoned as a presumed prostitute. Farther back yet is Rahab, the prostitute who helped Joshua at Jericho. For I provided for myself a king among his sons. The word provided here implies pre-planning. How long has God been planning to abandon Saul? What do you think? Or has God been pre-planning? Samuel said, I can't go. If Saul hears of this, he will kill me. Would Saul have killed Samuel if you knew Samuel was raising up a new king?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. You never
Could
know.
have been.
Samuel seems a little testy and reluctant to do God's building. What's going on with Samuel? The Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I indicate. So now it's no longer Samuel finding the king. God is doing it. So he disguised what he was doing by acting in his role as a priest. The disguise worked, though just barely. When Samuel arrived in town, the elders trembled when they met him. Do you come in peace? Samuel says, yes, I come in peace. Samuel told everyone to prepare for the sacrifice. He instructed Jesse to bring all his sons. When 7 sons of Jesse came, Samuel looked upon the oldest, Eliab, thinking, surely this is the one anointed. The implication is that Eliab possessed the body of a warrior, capable of wearing armor and still being able to run and throw a spear. So he's old enough to be a warrior, and not so old that he can't be a warrior anymore. However, God responded to this. Do not look at his height, his stature, or his appearance. I've rejected him. It's all in how you look at beauty. This is because I, the Lord, do not see as mortals see. Mortals can only look on outward appearance. The Lord, however, looks on the man's heart. Jesse called Abinahab forward. The Lord told Samuel, not this one. Jesse called Shammah to pass in front of Samuel. Samuel said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had all 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. The Lord spoke to Samuel, rejecting each one. Samuel said, are these all your sons? Jesse replied, there's one more. He's the youngest. He's out keeping the sheep. Samuel ordered Jesse to send for him. Samuel said they would not sit down to dinner until he arrived. So the brothers brought the 8th son in from the field. He had beautiful eyes, a ruddy complexion, and he was handsome. Notice how we put Prince Harry in there. The Lord told Samuel, arise and anoint him, for this is the one. Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the presence of his brothers. Look at the expression on the brothers' faces.
Mm-hmm.
They are not pleased. This is a secret that will remain only for Jesse's family to know. Oh, I answered the question. I'm sorry. I don't think the brothers were happy for David. What do you think?
They weren't.
But David stands in a long line of leaders who come from the least expected places, ranks, and birth order, but whom God has chosen. Can you name others?
Lincoln.
How about his disciples? They were fisher people. They were the lowest of the low. Given that this is Good Shepherd Sunday, what do you think the significance of David being a shepherd might be?
That he would be destined to be a good ruler and unite all of Israel.
And have a big heart.
And know his people.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
The Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. The Spirit that comes on David abandons Saul. Since Samuel said after Ramah, this is almost the last we hear of Samuel, except for his appearance later as a ghost. And we're done.
Yay.
Oh, yay.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
Good
Thank
job.
It
you.
almost seemed like I knew what I was talking about because Mary put those words on the slides for me.
Thank you, Deb, for doing that. You did a great
Sure.
job.